In today's news, there is a lot of talk about Canada becoming the 51st state from the president-elect, Donald Trump. This is not the first time this has happened in the history of Canada's relations with the United States. Let's go through our history and recall some of the attempts at manifest destiny. The United States made several attempts to invade or annex parts of Canada throughout its history. While Canada as a unified nation didn't exist until 1867, these attempts primarily targeted British North America, the colonies that eventually became Canada. At first it was Upper and Lower Canada, and then later on with the current provinces that we know of. Here's an overview of the many attempts. Number 1. The American Revolutionary War from 1775 to 1783. The invasion of Quebec. While the Revolutionary War was mostly fought in the 13 colonies, the colonial army was keen to make Quebec the 14th colony. However, that was flatly rejected from a diplomatic perspective. With the rejection, the Continental Army sought to bring Quebec to heel. However, the invasion against the Quebec habitant and British forces would challenge this colonial army. The key events to this invasion were the invasion of Quebec, the first major offensive of the American Revolution. The invasion of Quebec led by General Richard Montgomery took place from June 1775 to October 1776. The goal was to take control of the province of Quebec from Great Britain and convince French-speaking Canadians to join the revolution. In the end, General Richard Montgomery lost his life. The siege of Fort Saint-Jean. The Continental Army gained control of Quebec territory between Lake Champlain, Montreal, and Quebec City after the siege of Fort Saint-Jean from September 17 to November 3, 1775. The Battle of Quebec. The American forces, led by Benedict Arnold, were defeated in Quebec on December 31, 1775, by British soldiers and French and English-speaking militia. The aftermath of it all is that Arnold Benedict withdrew his remaining forces in May 1776. The American invasion of Canada lasted from September 1775 until June 1776. The final outcome was that the invasion failed, and the British maintained control over Quebec. The expedition was plagued by many challenges, including uncharted swamps, early snow, famine, sleeping in the open, pneumonia, heavy waterfalls, roiling rapids, killing portages, bad weather, bad maps. Number 2. The War of 1812. From 1812 to 1815. The United States declared war on Britain partly over trade restrictions and impressment of American sailors. The British government supporting Native American tribes against American citizens was a great concern to Americans. As far as Canada was concerned, the tensions of territorial expansion in North America by the American was worrisome. Many Americans also saw it as an opportunity to annex British North America. The key campaigns of the 1812 were the Fort Detroit Battle from 1812 to 1813. The United States launched invasions into Upper Canada, which is now Ontario, but faced defeats, including the surrender of Fort Detroit. The siege at Fort Detroit took place on August 15 to 16, 1812. The British were led by Major General Isaac Brock, and the Native Americans were led by Shawnee leader Tecumseh. The U.S. was led by Brigadier General William Hull. The British held Detroit for over a year. The victory reinvigorated the militia and civil authorities of Upper Canada, and inspired many Native Americans to take up arms against United States outposts and settlers. The Battle of Queenston Heights that took place on October 13, 1812. It was the first major battle of the war and a turning point in the conflict. A small British force, outnumbered 6-1, fought against a larger American army. The Americans initially gained control of the heights above Queenston Village, but Major General Isaac Brock led a small group of soldiers and militia to regain the heights. Brock was killed in the battle. The battle increased public support for the British and Canadians, and undermined American morale. It also temporarily halted the American invasion of Canada. The Battle of York was a battle in the War of 1812 that took place on April 27, 1813 in York, Ontario, now known as Toronto. Major General Roger Hale Sheaffe led the British and Ojibwa Indians, while Commodore Isaac Chauncey led the American fleet. The Americans won the battle, capturing Fort York and forcing the British to retreat to Kingston. The battle was part of the American strategy to expand into Canada. The Americans reported 55 killed and 265 wounded, with most casualties coming from an explosion at the fort's powder magazine. The British reported 157 killed. The Americans defeated 750 British and Ojibwa Indians defending Fort York. After winning the battle, the Americans burned York, the capital of Upper Canada. The outcome of these three attempts was: the United States invasions were repelled. British and Indigenous forces, led by figures like Tecumseh, defended Canada effectively. The Treaty of Ghent in 1814 was ratified by the United States Congress in 1815. It restored pre-war boundaries, with no territory changing hands. Number 3. Manifest Destiny era during the mid-19th century. While not outright invasions, there were political movements and rhetoric suggesting United States expansion into Canada. Manifest Destiny was a 19th-century belief that American settlers were destined to expand westward across North America. The term was coined in 1845 by newspaper editor John O'Sullivan. Some Americans believed Canada would naturally join the U.S. due to geographic and economic ties. Annexation sentiment was high among certain groups, especially during times of tension between Britain and the United States. Manifest Destiny was one of the earliest expressions of American imperialism. Number 4. Fenian Raids from 1866 to 1871. The Fenians were a group of Irish-American militants who sought to pressure Britain into granting Ireland independence. Fenians launched several cross-border raids into Canada, and believing this would hurt British interests and help their cause back in Ireland. The Fenians' raids were unsuccessful, but they had a significant impact on Canada's political and military development. The raids strengthened support for the Canadian Militia and Canadian Confederation in 1867. The raids marked the last invasion of the province that is now Ontario. The major raids occurred in Fort Erie in 1866, a temporary success for the Fenians before being repelled. Other smaller incursions in Quebec and New Brunswick. The outcome was that Canadian militias and British forces defeated the Fenians. The raids contributed to Canadian unity and the push for Confederation in 1867. Number 5. Post-Confederation and Speculative Plans. The Alaska boundary dispute was a territorial dispute between the United States and the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland over the boundary between southeastern Alaska and British Columbia. The dispute was triggered by the discovery of gold in the Yukon in 1896 and the Klondike Gold Rush that began in 1897. Both the United States and Great Britain wanted to secure access to the Pacific Ocean. The dispute was resolved in 1903 by an international tribunal, but the disagreement over the sea boundary continues today. Tensions arose over the boundary between Alaska and British Columbia, though it never escalated to military action. There were annexation sentiments. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, some United States politicians and businessmen promoted the idea of annexing Canada, but these were largely rhetorical and never acted upon militarily. Why did the U.S. fail to take Canada? There was a strong British defense. Britain maintained a significant military presence in Canada to deter American aggression. Indigenous allies. Many First Nations allied with the British, playing a crucial role in defending Canadian territories. Geography. Canada's vast and challenging terrain made invasions difficult. Canadian resistance. Local militias and volunteers were effective in repelling invasions. In total, the United States made two major military attempts during the American Revolution and the War of 1812 to invade what is now Canada, along with smaller-scale actions like the Fenian Raids. All these efforts failed, helping shape Canada's national identity as a country distinct from the United States. The fact that Canada is what it is today is a miracle. There were so many times in history that the way we live and the borders we have could have been drastically different. Thanks to the British soldiers, the French habitants, the indigenous people and the citizens of the land, we are what we are. True North, strong and free. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe.